Da 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 da. Hello there, and welcome to the world of the internet. My name is Professor Glass, but people affectionately refer to me as some random YouTuber. This world is inhabited far and wide by creatures called Pokémon fan creations. In some ways, fan creations are a fun but cheap imitation of actual Pokémon games, but other fan creations go beyond that. They are experiences that replicate what the official games do, but in their own unique way, which can result in an entirely new region filled with dozens of new creatures with a Pokémon story of the likes you've never seen before. Or it can look something like this. So, will you choose to play Pokémon fan creations? Great! Your very own Pokémon legend is about to unfold. A world of emulators and adventures with Pokémon begins. Let's go! Whoa, what the fuck happened to me? And I, for one, had never played a Pokémon fan game before. I've heard very good things about them, and I've had people come and tell me that they surpassed the 9 current generations we already have, but I've never experienced one for myself. Until now. Over the past couple of months, I've done nothing else but try to immerse myself in the world of Pokémon fan games, ROM hacks, and other creations, examining how exactly they take Pokémon's formula and seeing what fans can do with it for themselves. And after playing a ton of these games, I wanted to see if they managed to be more creative and inspired than the official releases, and see if I can answer the burning question that led me to make this video in the first place. Have the Pokémon fans surpassed its creators? And well, I'm not going to answer that question right now to, build suspense and everything. So where exactly do I begin? With the plethora of Pokémon fan creations out there, what was the best starting point for me? And well, I wanted to do this properly. I didn't just want to jump into the best of the best immediately, because not only did I want to see how good these fan games can get, but I also wanted to see how far they've come. So I decided to go all the way back to the beginning, or the early days of Pokémon fan creations. And after a little bit of digging, this is what I found. Introducing Pokémon Trep, and I'm like 65% sure it was the first official ROM hack. And what exactly did the mastermind of this game do with it? Absolutely nothing. Like, no joke, I was playing this game trying to find any sort of differences in the Pokémon or dialogue, but no, Trep doesn't do any of that. And the only apparent difference that I came across was one of the registered names for the main character was Trep. I don't know who this Trep fellow is, but thanks for wasting my time, dude. Moving on, we have Pokémon, another ROM hack of Pokemon Blue, where it's also an exact copy of the original, but now there's vulgar language. Everyone either talks about crack or sex, especially with other Pokemon, and I don't know if people found this funny back in the 2000s, but for me, the dialogue is really stale and gets very repetitive not too long after. There's no punchline, it's just crack. Everyone loves crack. I guess some of the Pokemon get their name changed, like Spearox or Dick, but there really isn't anything to know about the game after. And once you get past the first gym, all the dialogue goes back to being the exact same it was in the originals. So that's about all I can say on Pokémon. I don't even understand what's so funny about this anyway. Pokemon Meowth's Adventure is a ROM hack of Pokemon Blue where you play as an abandoned Meowth, and again, nothing's really changed. Like, it's sort of cool that your overworld sprite is that of a Meowth, but that's it. There's nothing else. And while I'd say this is a better ROM compared to Pokémon and Trep, I had no desire to play more than 10 minutes of it before moving on. And at this point, it's no surprise I'm not super impressed with what Pokemon fans have decided to do with these games. However, I do admit that's pretty cool that even all the way back in the late 90s, fans have already begun to personalize their own Pokemon experience. And this was done with technology that was a lot worse, all things considered. However, these three and other early ROMs, while impressive, were never considered the true beginning of Pokemon fan creations. And it wasn't until 2004 where a software engineer from San Francisco made his own ROM of Pokemon Red and Blue called Pokemon Brown. Made by the one and only Cool Boy Man, people within the ROM hacking community like to call this the first real Pokemon ROM hack. While the previous hacks made a couple of changes, Pokémon Brown is completely new in almost every possible way. Aside from the graphics and borrowed assets, everything else is made from the ground up. With a completely new region, different story beats, new sprites, and more, it wouldn't be hard to convince a non-Pokémon fan that this is an official game. Your character even has some lines of dialogue as well. Although it doesn't really add anything to the plot, but still pretty cool. I actually managed to complete the entire game, and while it did show its age here and there, I was really impressed the entire way through. This game is over 20 years old, but it still managed to have Pokemon up until Gen 4 available, and has had updates where you'd be able to visit Kanto and Johto. To make this kind of hack, when literally nothing else came before it, is monumental, and revolutionized the hacking community for years to come. I would like to draw the comparison between the early hacks in Astro Boy and Pokemon Brown and Dragon Ball. While Astro Boy is technically the first shonen of its kind, it was Dragon Ball that brought the shonen genre to the mainstream and influenced other shonens for years to come, just like Pokemon Brown did. Although I guess the early hacks are more so mods than ROM hacks, so I guess this analogy doesn't really work, and I just wasted the past 20 seconds for nothing. Cool Boy Man went on to make a sequel to Pokemon Brown and Pokemon Prism, and while I haven't had the chance to play it myself, I've only heard good things, and it adds even more unique stuff than Brown ever did. And at this point, I can tell that Pokemon fan creations can be something really special, and I couldn't wait to try and see what else these developers had to offer, which is exactly why I chose to play this. I know people were expecting to see something like Ralco Red or Pokemon Unbound, and we'll get to those eventually, but again, I wanted to see all aspects of Pokemon fan creations, which means I'm going to talk about more of the obscure ones to see how weird they can get. So that's why we're going to be covering Pokemon mods next, which is when we have a game that is made the exact same way from before, with the same region, story, gyms, and even most of the same dialogue, but the big difference here are the changes to the Pokemon and the sprites. And you might ask yourself, if they don't change up the gameplay that much, then why'd I choose to play them? Because they look funny, I don't know. Exhibit A, Pokemon Bidoof Edition. It's literally just Fire Red, but now every Pokemon in the game is Bidoof. But not like the actual Bidoof, but a weird fusion between a certain Pokemon and Bidoof. And surprisingly, these are pretty well done. All of the Pokemon look exactly how you'd think they look if they were Bidoof, making for some pretty cute designs. And this was pretty neat and all, but I started to wonder, what other hacks can I find are made this way, and how far does the extent go? And that's where I stumbled upon Dragon Ball Z Team Training, where instead of Pokemon, they're now all replaced with Dragon Ball characters, coming with their own movesets, typings, and even evolutions. Admittedly, this is actually a little bit more than a reskin of Fire Red, where there's certain dialogue changes, overworld sprites that are native to this game, and a couple of new plot points, but for the most part, this really is just Pokemon, but now you fight everyone with characters from Dragon Ball. And the hack really goes to show how much love the developers had for the Dragon Ball franchise. And it also shows how little I know about Dragon Ball, because there were a lot of moments where I encountered a character and thought, this is not canon, I don't care what you say. A lot of other mods within the section follow what Dragon Ball Team Training does, but to a much less impressive extent. Mostly just being sprite changes and sometimes different moves. But it's still kinda cool to see all these what if scenarios come to life. Like what if every Pokemon was a Sonic character, what if every Pokemon was a One Piece character, or what if every Pokemon was a GlassHalfFull character. Wait, what the fuck? And while they are pretty cool in the beginning, the novelty would quickly wear off since you're essentially just playing the same game over and over again. Which is why I found Pokemon Sweet to be a breath of fresh air. Originally, I thought that this game would just be Fire Red, but every Pokemon was cake. But to my surprise, there's a lot of unique stuff going for it. For one, there's Pokemon up to Gen 5, and they're all caked up. Plus, there's an entirely new typing chart for you to memorize, and some changes here and there to Kanto itself. Maybe these games are more so ROM hacks than just mods. But I'm already so far into the script, But look at these awesome designs, like Slugnut, Candix, and my personal favorite, Panfisk. Because come on guys, he's Panfisk! It's odd how so many people like to take the Gen 1 games and put a really weird spin on it, which is why Pokemon Reverse Red, made by Nuzlocke Joe, is so interesting to me, because instead of that, he reverses the games instead. Where instead of starting in a small town with nothing, it's now, reversed, and you start as champion, and now have to work your way down to what would be the beginning of the game. The hack even goes as far as to make your Pokemon forget moves and de-evolve, since your Pokemon's levels go down as you progress, or de-progress, throughout the game. I can admit that this is not the funniest mod like the ones I mentioned previously, but it's still a cool concept nonetheless. I've actually been enjoying myself a lot more with these mods than I thought I would. Sure, they don't truly show how good Pokemon fan creations can get, but they do take a good amount of effort, and I've been impressed by a lot of the things I've seen so far. But I got too overconfident. I didn't really know what kind of situation I was getting myself into until I played Pokemon Derpizard Edition. Now you might think that this mod would be a little bit similar to Bidoof version, where every Pokemon would be fused with Charizard, but no. Pokemon Derpizard version means that everything is Charizard. The intro is Charizard, every Pokemon is Charizard, your rival is Charizard, even your own mother is Charizard, which I guess kind of makes sense. Seeing so much of this orange lizard became too much for me, so I stopped as soon as I could and found another Pokemon mod called Moemon, and in this one, Pokemon Omega Paradox is Pokemon Black and White, but not really Black and White, where it's mostly the same game, but random shit is different for some apparent reason. Like Sharon and Bianca are replaced by Cynthia and Drake. You walk into a house and just see Getsis hanging out with Iris and Looker. There's new Pokemon here, like Snoggy, and what the fuck is Yugi doing here? I feel like I might have gone too far at this point. All of these mods were funny at first, but now it just seems like a different version of brain rot. It's like a drug I can't keep doing, but I just get so curious, and this curiosity would continue until I came across a very peculiar mod that made me come to my senses. Because let's just say this one is a very special one. On March 23rd, 2018, username WasabiRaptor uploaded the ROM hack Pokemon Oof, a mod based off Pokemon Emerald, and on the surface it seems pretty harmless, but then you start up the game and you're met with this. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Every meme you thought was funny 6 years ago is here. Everyone says ooh woo. When some word contains the letter B, it's the weird emoji thing. The music makes my ears bleed, and the developer tried their best to make your playthrough as painful as possible. There are many things that go through your mind as you play Pokemon Oof, such as, what am I doing with my life? Why did someone create this? Was it really worth making this video? How are you already 21 and all your friends either have girlfriends or at least doing something worthwhile with their lives while you're up at 2 AM in the morning playing this shitpost when it has nothing to do with the main topic of this video? Needless to say, I didn't feel like finding any other mods and was ready to move on to the next section. But don't worry guys, I eventually found a good reason as to why I played Pokemon Oof. I just can't say it now, but trust me, I did. I feel like any Pokemon fan that's watched the anime wishes there would have been a game based off it. Watching Ash and his friends go on these wacky adventures was something so cool that I wish could be replicated in the games. And for the longest time, that was never possible, until Metapod 23 released Pokemon Ash Gray, a hack that is based off Fire Red, but now follows all the events of Ash's journey in Season 1 of the anime. Things like Ash finding the abandoned Charmander, the entirety of the SS Anne and Giant Island episode are here, and even the more obscure ones like the banned Porygon episode are referenced here as well. And a lot of the areas from Kanto are heavily altered to fit the way Ash experienced his journey all those years ago. Sure, a lot of the events that happen are very watered down from what they were in the anime, and you battle against Team Rocket a lot of times because they basically show up in every episode, but it was just a nice nostalgia trip for people like me who watched the anime when they were younger, and now finally being able to live out my childhood dreams of being like Ash. Although the episode where James gets really huge badonkers isn't here though, and I think that's a big missed opportunity. At this point, I'm having a really fun time playing through all these games, one after another. Finally playing some classics like this one or Brown was certainly a good time, but I was craving something more. A ROM hack that'll help me answer the question that I posed at the start of the video, and to my surprise, the next game I'd play would get me a step closer to answering that question. On the surface, you'd feel like you know what to expect after seeing a hack called Rocket Red. Oh, this game will have you play as a Team Rocket Grunt, but instead of becoming a Pokemon champion, you'd become the leader or something along those lines. And the game certainly starts off with that kind of vibe. You get recruited into Team Rocket, you get your Rattata out of a box, and you go do your work for Giovanni. You have the ability to steal Pokemon from other trainers, which is pretty neat, and the game doesn't have you complete any gyms, and instead you go on missions, kinda like Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. So already, it is a breath of fresh air compared to other Pokemon games. But what really makes Rocket Red shine is the overarching plot. It stars all the same characters from the original games, but you see them in a completely new light. Like Bill, who was pretty forgettable in the original games, is now one of the main characters here, having ties to Team Rocket, and overall has a much more sinister personality. You see a much darker side of him, which also goes for the rest of Kanto compared to how they were in the original games. Which is also the biggest reason as to what makes Rocket Red so damn good. The fact that everything that happens here happens at the exact same time as Red's journey, meaning you would encounter him at several different points in the story in places you'd come across when you would play through Fire Red. So even though this is fan-made, it can logically work in the real canon because everything that happens here lines up so damn well with the originals. It is so insane to me how well this works to elevate the gameplay in both games, and gives reasoning for some of the biggest questions we've had in those original games, such as, were the reason as to why the SSN captain gets sick. Why find the key to Cinnabar's gym in the Pokemon Mansion is also explained here as well. Hell, this game gives a logical and plausible reason for Missing No's existence. God, how would you even come up with that kind of stuff? There are so many plot twists and things I'd love to talk about, but I genuinely think that Rocket Red should be experienced by every Pokemon fan. Like guys, I was actually clapping when the credits start to roll. It is so good. And then I played Pokemon Clover, and it is certainly a ROM hack that definitely exists. So Pokemon Infinite Fusion is one of the more unique ROM hacks. Alright, fine, don't worry. Despite what Pokemon Clover seems like on the outside, it's actually a very well put together ROM hack. Originally, it was set to just be a simple Fire Red reskin until the devs decided to rebuild the entire game and made it something completely new. The game overhauls a ton from the originals, like new areas to explore, new designs for gym leaders, the evil team, and even adds some new music that goes really hard. But the biggest selling points of Pokemon Clover are the new Pokemon introduced in it, otherwise known as Fakemon. This was the first game I covered that actually has Fakemon in it, and it does not disappoint. There's Fakemon based on ideas that Gamefreak has never tried before, and ideas that might already exist, but Clover puts a unique spin on it. Most of the Fakemon designs are so good that I had trouble setting up a full team without switching out mons constantly because I kept finding ones that had such cool designs that I really want to use. Like this one, probably can't show that one. Or this one. Oh, probably can't show that one. Or that one. Or that one, or that one, or that one, or that one, or that one. So this game was made by 4chan, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But that does mean it borrows a lot from that platform, especially when it comes to memes. And sometimes it can be funny or really cool, like how one of your rivals is named Kexandra, or how the gym leader theme is a remix of Darude Sandstorm, which again, goes really hard, but at the same time, there are a lot of racial and sexual slurs that just come out of nowhere, and really don't need to be here. And personally, I don't really have any problems if there are mature jokes, but it's just way too excessive. There is a gym leader that I absolutely cannot show for what they represent, and there's just a lot of moments in general that make me say, why? What is the purpose of this being here other than for shock humor? But if you can look past that, then you can tell that a lot of work went into making Pokemon Clover. The changes and the new areas are really well done, and the Fakemon, while some can be considered offensive, are very well detailed, and makes for a very solid ROM hack all around. Just proceed with caution, that's all. The next ROM hack on our list is one that gained a ton of traction collection within the past year, being Pokémon Infinite Fusion. This one has a very interesting development history because it started off as a very basic rework of the original Kanto games, but as the name suggests, you'd now be able to fuse Pokemon together, but these fusions would be nothing more than a face and color palette swap. But it wasn't until 2023 where Infinite Fusion really came into its own and maximized its full potential. The hack is now completely revamped, featuring an original story, Pokemon past the first generation, and many, and I say many, quality of life features. This is something that a lot of ROM hacks are going to be incorporating, but it is worthy to note the sheer amount of customization Infinite Fusion brings to the table. A speed up button, option to toggle experience share on and off, and most importantly, difficulty settings. God, after such a long time of begging Game Freak to give us some sort of way to make these games more challenging, it feels so nice for the creator of these hacks to just simply give us these options, making these games feel much more personalized and letting everyone have the choice to make their experience as difficult or as casual as possible. But the options don't just stop there, no, because it extends to the main feature of Infinite Fusion. Obviously, fusing Pokemon is super cool. Borrowing attributes from two Pokemon and combining them into something new can make for a lot of fun, and seeing how these designs can range from being super badass to funny to whatever this is awesome. And with over 200,000 fusions in the game, it'll be hard not to try experimenting for hours. My personal favorite I came across was when I tried fusing my Tangrowth and Noctowl together. I didn't particularly love these two Pokemon, but since they have such different designs, I was curious to see the amalgamation they would become before I put them in the box. Just to be completely floored after seeing this, and from that point on, it became one of my favorite fusions to use. But say for example, I didn't like the specific fusion for whatever reason. Well, Infinite Fusion has got you covered, because not only does the game have tons of customization outside of battle, but you can also choose what your fusion could look like on the battlefield. All of them having their own take on what they should look like, and showcasing the creative minds of those who decided to contribute. And this also extends to the unfused Pokemon as well. Basically, all of them have sprites at different angles, and some trying to highlight specific parts of a Pokemon's personality. Like for Haunter, you could choose a sprite that makes it look pretty sinister, or have a design that makes it look a lot more creepy, and you even have the option to choose its OG sprite from the original Red and Blue games. It could seem unnecessary since it doesn't affect the gameplay at all, but it helps to keep the game very relevant in the eyes of the players and the designers. Infinite Fusion lets artists all over the world have their own input, and people playing this game can appreciate what they do with all their hard work. And frankly, it's kind of beautiful. I've clocked in a ton of hours into this game, but I still feel like I barely scratched the surface with it since there's so many fusions I've yet to see, and with the game constantly being updated, that notion will always be there. For the longest time, I always felt like the next gimmick Pokemon was gonna add was gonna be fusion. I mean, it just makes the most sense. We already have Pokemon going Super Saiyan and really big and have funny crystal hats, so logically I thought fusion would be implemented somewhere down the line. But after playing Infinite Fusion, I don't know if that's possible. Not to say I wouldn't like to see it, but I don't think they'd ever be able to outdo what Infinite Fusion has already done. And as long as the game keeps getting updated, not only will our expectations be higher if Game Freak ever does do fusion, but that also means the hack will continue to be relevant for years to come. And that also goes for our next ROM hack on the list, which also happens to be the most popular one, Pokemon Radical Red. A ROM hack of, you guessed it, Pokemon Fire Red. Look, I got a lot of people in the comments of my last video telling me I'm a fraud for never playing Fire Red and Leaf Green, but you can't say that now. I've played like 8 ROM hacks based off those games, so am I good now? Can people please stop judging me for that? Also, I was a year old when those games came out. How do you expect me to ever play them? This is actually the only ROM hack I've had a friend recommend I play. So I was excited to see how this Fire Red was so different from all the other Fire Reds I've already played. And at first, I really liked what I was seeing. There's a bunch of options, following Pokemon are back, but not in the way that BDSP butchers it, but in the way we all liked it in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Characters from different games also make an appearance, and there's this thing called an infinite repel, which, thank you? But by far the most impressive part of Radical Red is how it has every Pokemon from every generation. Literally right at the start, you get the option of choosing your starter from any region, and every trainer you come across has been revamped to include Pokemon from those regions, making for the gym leader teams to be much more interesting. It's really cool seeing Radical Red with all these Pokemon here, and it reminds me of the official games nowadays and how every Pokemon from each region is available for you to use. Oh yeah. Even early on, I was able to see why so many people would hype up this ROM hack, and could see myself having a really fun time with it. And then I met Falconer. So once you reach Pewter City, instead of going straight to the gym, you have to go to the museum to see a familiar face. And at first you're like, oh sick, it's Falconer, that's so cool. And then you go up to talk to him and he initiates a battle, which is fine. At this point I have an Alolan Sandshrew, so I'd assume I dust him with that and be on my way. It took me 3 hours and over 20 tries to beat him. So one thing I didn't know going into this game was that it's going to be really fucking hard. You must be locked in for almost every battle. The game does not joke around whatsoever. I am not well educated in EVs and IVs, but I've had my fair share of showdown battles, so I thought I was pretty decent at Pokemon, but apparently I suck ass when little Jimmy over here is destroying me with his Elite Four ready Greedont. Now I'm fully aware that the start of the game specifically asks you how hard you want your playthrough to be, and that's why I picked normal. I wasn't looking for a super mind-numbing experience, but even then I feel like normal was way harder than it had any right to be. And the game kind of punishes you if you try to go about it in any typical way. Usually my Pokemon experiences involve me picking a team of 6 and rolling with them until the end of the league. I always enjoy forming some kind of bond with these creatures made up of numbers and code, and would bring them into any battle I'm in, even if I know they'll have a disadvantage. But here, this game really wants you to experiment with different teams suitable for different gyms, and there's people who like doing that. But man, I chose Rowlet as my starter because he's one of my favorite Pokemon, but he ended up being a liability because every Pokemon had a fucking ice type move. What do you mean that Ledian can use fucking Ice Punch? My poor sweet Rowlet experienced a lot of pain during my playthrough. So I did something I usually never do. I searched up the teams of every gym leader before going into them to formulate some kind of strategy. And I swear to God, if someone says this is technically cheating, fair enough, I can totally see why. But personally, I found it kind of fun to map out which of my Pokemon would do the best against theirs. And eventually, after dozens of attempts, I would be able to figure them out, which was super satisfying and made all the hard work really pay off. And so did all those save states. Sorry, I'm not sorry. But in the end, I didn't get super far in. I beat Erica by the skin of my teeth and decided that I've seen enough. It's not like I didn't like the ROM hack. There's a lot of good stuff going on, and for those fans who always wanted a harder experience, Radical Red would be right up their alley. But for me, this hack and also other hacks that involved making the original game much harder weren't for me. I wanted to see what the more original ROM hacks had to offer. But more importantly, they're bad for my mental health. Fuck! So all these hacks are impressive in their own way, taking games that are previously established and adding on to them in some way, shape, or form. But what about those Pokemon fan creations that go a step further, starting from scratch and making their own game that looks and acts very similar to any old Pokemon game, but in their own distinct way? So let's talk about Pokemon Fan Games. Pokemon fan games are very few and far between. Yes, they still use a bunch of assets and utilize the graphics from the DS/Game Boy era, however, everything else is entirely new. The region, the characters, the story are nothing we've never seen before, and even introduces entirely new mechanics that not only fit the game they're in, but also make sense within the canon of the main series, like Pokemon Unbound, which takes the Kalos War, something that's been long forgotten by Game Freak, and makes it prevalent here, stating that Kalos was at war with the Boreas region and making Hoopa a prominent player in the war and the game in general. Hoopa has always been a really interesting Pokemon, since it has the ability of, you know, teleportation, but in the official games, his only purpose is to spawn legendary Pokemon for you to catch in Oras. In general, a lot of these fan games would actually try to utilize these legendary Pokemon in creative ways and have them hold some sort of significance in the plots instead of just being a prize when you bought a Happy Meal from McDonald's. And not to mention how they significantly change up the gyms as well. Instead of just a copy and paste one typing per gym, they can center their gym around a certain theme, like this one in Uranium, which has a science/technology theme, and so a lot of the Pokemon you'd battle would be electric and or steel type. Or how in that same game, there's a gym based off the Sun and Moon, and you gotta fight 2 gym leaders separately instead of 1. Unbound does something really cool with its last gym, and how instead of Pokemon fainting after their HP bar runs out, they'll devolve instead into their other stages, and you gotta take out the entire evolutionary line in order to win. I've been thinking for the longest time that Pokemon gyms needed to be changed up somehow. They had something going on with the Alolan games, but I find this to be much more intriguing. Focusing a gym around a certain theme or mechanic is what would help keep Pokemon games fresh, and something I would really like to see happen in future titles. Another great thing about these fan games is that they don't abandon certain features like Game Freak tends to do, more specifically in terms of Mega Evolution. Something that every Pokemon fan liked to some capacity was just removed after Gen 6. So here, not only will you find that they bring them back, but they give new Pokemon Mega Evolutions as well. And overall, that's the best part about Pokemon fan games in general. All these hopes and dreams from fans that Game Freak will never listen to can be here, because the fans know what the fans want, and seeing a feature like Mega Evolution given some new life and not thrown away in the trash makes it feel worth more than just a one-time gimmick Game Freak treated it as. Let's just forget that Legends ZA is coming out so that line can make more sense. And other aspects that appeal to all sorts of Pokemon fans are also here. Do you want a story that feels more personal for the player? Something that can motivate you? That does not include becoming the Pokemon champion? Well, Pokemon Xenoverse has got you covered. With a story that involves a missing father as he travels throughout the region looking for him. Xenoverse also does some things unlike any other game, with the idea of familiar Pokemon coming from different dimensions, your starter playing a vital role in the plot, and it doesn't simply just evolve, but it changes throughout the story alongside your character. The game also has some very unique locations. No 2 cities or missions act in a similar way, and the characters have such awesome designs and actually have a personality. But by far my favorite part of this game are the Pokemon boss battles. Sort of acting like totems from Sun and Moon, you come across Xenoverse Pokemon every now and then, which are fun battles where these bosses usually have more than 1 health bar, making it actually feel like a boss battle and also makes it more entertaining. But before every fight, it flashes to some gorgeous art depicting that moment. Now this seems very minor and not worth mentioning, but to me, it feels special. Since when you're younger and you're playing through the end of Pokemon Black and White or Platinum, what you're seeing on screen isn't super flashy, but your childlike wonder envisions this as a climactic moment. Some grandiose battle for the fate of the world, even if you're just looking at 2x4 sprites on screen. And Xenoverse helps replicate that feeling of a high-stakes Pokemon battle in this art form, and I take a moment to appreciate it anytime it shows up. But maybe you're looking for a different experience, one that not only adds a completely new region, but also has a dex full of new Pokemon and even adds a new typing. Well, Pokemon Uranium is literally right there. It's set in the Tandor region and introduces 200 of the most incredible Fakemon you've ever seen. The game can falter here and there due to its endless backtracking and flaws of the old Pokemon games like HMs, but in a strange way, doesn't that feel a little bit nostalgic as well? Having to put HM slaves in your party kinda sucks, but it also means it has a lot of those strength and surfing puzzles that the old games were known for, and are strangely absent from Pokemon nowadays. I also mentioned that Pokemon Uranium introduces a new type, being the Nuclear type, which is sort of just a ripoff of Shadow Pokemon from Gale of Darkness and Colosseum, but it's used pretty effectively here, and ties into the overarching plot of Pokemon Uranium. Which, speaking of plot, one of the biggest critiques you find people say about Pokemon games is how they handle their story. People who have been playing for years say that their stories are too shallow, or they feel too childish, which leads fans to say that their games only appeal to younger audiences. But how about the older fans then? Why can't we have a more mature plot than just, oh, my parents neglected me and are also dead, and the one good thing in my life is in critical condition and will probably not make it? Oh shoot, wrong plot line. Can't we have a more mature plot than just, oh god, kids are bullying me in school? And while Xenoverse and Uranium have very solid stories, a fan game that goes above and beyond in this aspect would be Pokémon Insurgence, where not only do you get your mind erased and get trapped inside of a prison, but you also witness a ritual where someone dies for the sake of summoning Darkrai, and this happens within the first 10 minutes of the story. Compared to the other games, Insurgence might not be as impressive production-wise, but in almost every other facet, it is incredibly well done. Like I just mentioned, the story is by far the best part. The Torrent region is home to lots of different Pokemon cults, people who are like the evil teams, but now worship these creatures like we've never seen before, and one by one, we have to disband these cults in very different ways. There's a lot of serious topics with sacrifices, mind control, and there's even a black market, but never does it feel super edgy, and it surprisingly works really well with such a wholesome series like Pokemon. Not to mention the introduction of Delta Pokemon. While there's no Fakemon in this game like Uranium or Clover, Delta Pokemon are like failed lab experiments of already existing Pokemon, just now their designs are different along with their typings. Which sounds very similar to what regional variants are, and at face value, it just seems like a different version of that. But what if I told you that the first version of this fan game came out in 2014, a whole 2 years before we got regional variants? Yeah, that's right, this was regional variants before regional variants were a thing, so technically the devs of Insurgence can sue Game Freak if they really wanted to. I'm kidding, that's a horrible idea. But overall, Insurgence and every other fan game I've talked about are very well made. They bring back features that we've begged to come back for years and introduces a ton of things that I'm surprised have never been done earlier. And it makes me wonder why Game Freak can't do any of this stuff. Like, why do these games offer up lots of post-game content that are all for free? Well, we had to shell out money to buy some DLC months after the game's initial release. But it doesn't stop there though. There are tons of other fan games that outclass the official ones in so many ways. Pokémon Reborn has a slightly edgy theme, but makes up for it in the sheer length, with 20 badges to achieve and 800 Pokemon scattered across the region. Pokemon Sage offers hundreds of new Fakemon, and it isn't even finished yet. But even for those people who just want to play the originals, but in a more challenging way than they remember, boom, just take a look at Emerald Kaizo or Volt White and Blaze Black. Games that don't change up the core fundamentals in the story, but offer up much tougher battles, making the games actually feel hard. At this point, you probably get the idea, and I don't have to endlessly name off ROMs and fan games and how they differ from the official ones, but you do come to a certain point where these fan games don't really go beyond that. Sure, they're still really cool, but after 28 years, we've gotten pretty used to the standard Pokemon formula, and these fan games are just offering different versions of that. And it's not like anyone tried to make their own Pokemon fan game that tries to be a whole different genre instead. Poké-Rogue, created by Page Fault Games, exploded in popularity in the first half of 2024, taking the core concept of Pokemon battles but tweaking it to fit the format of a typical roguelike game. You have access to any starter across all 9 regions, and your mission is to get to floor 200 without losing once. You come across wild Pokemon you can add to your team, you fight trainers, gym leaders, and bosses on random floors, but like any other roguelike, if you lose at any point, you start back at the beginning, but this time you'll gain certain abilities to make your runs easier on the next try. It is very addicting and can be replayed endlessly since no 2 runs will be the same. I actually got pretty far in it myself, and I was proud of the progress I made. Until one of my friends showed me a screenshot of how far they are, and after seeing whatever this is, 2 things came to my mind. First, wow, I suck ass actually, and should never think I'm good at anything Pokemon related ever again. And secondly, what an insane amount of dedication it takes to make something so different and unlike anything we've ever seen before from the almost 30 years Pokemon has been around. And it got me thinking, what other Pokemon fan games can I find that are in a different genre from what we're used to? And wow, there is a lot more than I originally thought. And naturally, I won't be able to cover them all because, come on, how much Pokemon can one man actually play? You probably already see where this is going, don't you? Pokemon MMO wants you to stop playing by yourself. Okay, that sounds kind of weird. Stop jerking off by yourself and jerk off with other people, where it takes the original gameplay and storyline of Pokemon but transforms it into an MMO experience. You start off in the Unova region, and eventually when you get far enough, you can travel to different regions as well. And aside from all the online functionalities like trading and battling people you meet, I just find it so cool to see people going on their own journey at the same time you do, giving the vibe that you're in a Pokemon world with real people and not just programmed NPCs. And it's a great way to experience the old games in a completely new way. But you know what? What if you fucking hate Pokemon? Well, not actually hate the creatures, but how it's played. The anime depicts battles in a crazy way, with Pokemon moving around and jumping and dodging and all that, but when you play the game, it's just a bunch of JPEGs doing canned animations and standing across from each other. If the standard gameplay of Pokemon is too boring for you, then you should check out Pokemon Reloaded, a game that acts as a real-time battle simulator, where your Pokemon actually have the ability to avoid other attacks and clash with your opponents head-on. It feels like the way you always envisioned it, but not only is it finally happening in front of you, but now your hands get cramped because you're not used to moving your fingers this much while playing Pokemon. But maybe that's not right for you. You can see the effort poured into this game, but the combat is so rigid and you prefer something to an actual fighting game, but not the way Pokémon Tournament is, and more like a Smash Bros or a Street Fighter. Huh? What's that? Oh yeah, that also exists as well! Pokemon Type Wild takes traditional 2D fighting games and slaps a bunch of Pokemon onto it. But what's interesting here is apparently this was made by former Pokemon animators, which sounds far-fetched until you notice how fluid and flawless the animations look. Which is crazy since this game came out in the early 2010s, but still has aged pretty damn well. But we don't just stop at fighting games though. Any Pokemon fan when they're back in elementary school probably came across Pokemon Tower Defense, a flash game that combines the gameplay style of traditional Pokemon and the funny Monkey Balloons game into one. You take on waves of Pokemon with your own team, and you have to constantly be on your feet, changing positions, switching out, and even catching Pokemon if you see one that you want on your team. And the game is way longer and much better than it has any right to be. Ooh, or Pokemon Dusk might just look like a ROM of Gold and Silver, but is actually a real-time survival horror game where you must take down hordes of zombified Pokemon and humans. And I start to get really into that until I found out about Pokemon Academy Life, which seems like a shameless dating sim at first, like Persona 5, but actually has some great characters and a decent story, all encompassed with some gorgeous art. And it also makes Professor Oak really hot, which makes me feel things that I never felt before. Pokemon Showdown! Oh, who am I kidding? Everyone knows about Showdown. I just needed a distraction from hot Professor Oak. But have you ever heard of Mokepon before? Not necessarily a game, but a comic set in the Pokemon world with a slightly gloomy and dark tone. The dialogue might come off as pretty cheesy here and there, but I found it to be a pretty interesting take on the Pokemon world, where it's usually very wholesome and lighthearted, but now Holy Hand Grenade tried to make it more gritty, and the art complements that vibe pretty well. What the fuck am I talking about right now? Jesus Christ, I've dug this Pikachu-shaped hole deeper and deeper, and now I'm talking about a comic for some reason? And even though this shows that I have a lot of trouble focusing at one thing on a time, and I should probably get that checked out, it also made me realize that I've come across fan-made projects made by Pokemon fans years before making this video, and if you're anything like me, then you've probably had as well. Because we literally consume fan creations in the most unlikely of places, and in our daily lives. If you're chronically online and spend a good chunk of your time on YouTube every day, it's incredibly likely you've come across a video like this before. And if you're chronically online and someone who likes to watch videos relating to Pokemon, your YouTube feed will definitely look something like this. And this is what the majority of PokeTube looks like nowadays. Creators will either take a fan game and make it into a video, or challenge themselves in some way to make a Pokemon game harder. And this is a very popular niche on YouTube. Hell, if you just search up the phrase Pokemon but you'll be flooded with hundreds upon thousands of videos of YouTubers adding some sort of twist or mechanic to the game to spice up Pokemon's gameplay. And you might wonder why I choose to bring this up, and for that I ask you a question. Don't these videos technically count as fan creations? All these videos have games that either have been modded or at least customized by fans, like Nuzlocke for example. One of the most famous ways of altering Pokemon games to make them have higher stakes. No! with videos on the platform garnering millions of views and people taking the idea of a Nuzlocke and adding onto it with things like randomizers or egg locks. And the idea of Nuzlocks were in fact made by Pokemon fans, not by Gamefreak, and are so popular that some of the fan games and ROM hacks I talked about have a Nuzlocke mode built into it. And fun fact, if you're wondering how exactly I found all these games in the first place, it was from YouTube and finding so many people who've played these games already, showing their experience with the world through their videos. In fact, I didn't actually play any of these games at all. Everything you just watched me talk about was stolen off YouTube. How about that? I'm kidding. Don't actually believe that. I did spend a significant portion of my life playing through these fan games. But the point is, PokeTubers for the longest time have tried finding different ways to play Pokemon. Even years before the era of Pokemon butt videos, you'd find multiple part Let's Plays of people playing through Pokemon Glazed or Zeta and Omicron to occupy themselves when no new Pokemon game was coming out. Because even though Pokemon has a very busy schedule, it's not enough for PokeTubers to endlessly replay the same games without it getting stale eventually. Which is where ROM hacks and all these other fan games come in, to try to keep Pokemon and their content fresh for others to watch. And in a weird way, creates a beautiful cycle between these content creators and developers, where the developers would create their own Pokemon fan game, PokeTubers would then find them and produce some content out of it, therefore bring these creations to a bigger audience in which the fans try to play it for themselves, growing all parties involved as a result, which not only do I find pretty amazing, but also contributes to the whole community side Pokemon has to it as well. I've talked about before how Gamefreak has tried since the beginning to make Pokemon a very community-based series, and this by nature contributes to the idea, only now it isn't directly influenced officially and it's entirely formed by the fan base. And as a result, makes the franchise 10 times larger than Gamefreak has ever done before. Don't believe me? Here, let me show you what I mean. Mario is another series that consists of a ton of fan games, which makes sense. He's the godfather of gaming. Of course, people would want to make their own Mario game. And if you happen to look up Mario fan games on Reddit, it has a good amount of people in it. And the Discord community is even bigger, exceeding the quadruple digits. And again, that's totally respectable. But how about we take a look at Pokemon Insurgents' subreddit? It's one of the more popular fan games, so maybe it'll have 100, maybe 200 people in it. Whoa! 20,000 people active in the subreddit? God, I knew this was popular, but that is insane. Wait, if Pokemon Insurgents' subreddit is this big, then how big is the official Pokemon ROM hacking subreddit? Oh my fucking god! 250,000 people are active in this subreddit. How is this number so typical for every other Pokemon subreddit? What do you mean that this is bigger than the official Sonic subreddit? This subculture of Pokemon is so huge that not only does it eclipse some of the most popular gaming series to ever exist, but also was able to win a Guinness World Record. Do you guys remember Twitch Plays Pokemon? The ongoing live stream where fans all over the world played Pokemon Red through inserting commands on the live chat which went into the game? Well, apparently, so many Pokemon fans participated through this journey that it got an award for having the most participants on a single player online game, reaching a crazy high number of 1,165,140. And from this stream alone, Twitch and other users alike have gone on to make more of these kinds of streams, uniting Pokemon fans in a weird way to overcome this mind-numbing task. And there's so many other branches for Pokemon fan creations I can talk about, like all the concept arts and fake gameplay fans have made, like the one by Pokeyugumi, who recreates the Red and Green games not only in 3D, but also recreates it in the original Ken Sugimori art that Pokemon used to look like back in the day, or the creator who remade the entirety of the BDSP trailer in a matter of a couple of weeks, only this time it doesn't look like shit. And speaking of that sorry excuse of a game, since it was made in Unity, people have been able to go into the source code and actually do cool things with it, like modifying the overworld Pokemon, adding elements from Platinum. Kirby's there for some reason. Fans every day are modifying these games to make them a more enjoyable experience for not only themselves, but for other people. When I was first researching this, I was absolutely flabbergasted that the subculture would be this big. But after everything I talked about, it does make sense with the sheer amount of fan games and ROM hacks there is to find online, and the content dedicated to them. And honestly, it's a big accomplishment to have such a popular series, to have super passionate fans that can create their own work that shows their love for the source material. And for some reason, Game Freak fucking hates them. Upon the many questionable business practices Game Freak likes to commit, among their most evil would happen to be banning Pokemon fan creations for no reason. Pokemon Uranium fully released back in August 2016, and within that same month, it received a DMCA from Nintendo. Similar cases also happened to Pokemon Prism, Pixelmon, Pokemon Brick Bronze, and more. Some speculate that if a certain game happens to get super popular like Uranium did, that's when Nintendo decides to give them the boot. But it's odd, how does making fan games impact the official ones? Like 99% of people who play them are most likely Pokemon fans who are buying the new releases, so it's not like they're stealing loyal fans from them. But even if they did, they aren't profiting from these games at all. Pokemon Uranium and every other fan game are for free, so why do these executives feel the need to wipe them off the internet? But their most heinous crime happened earlier this year when the Pokemon Company decided to take down Relic Castle, the primary source to find Pokemon Rom hacks and fan games. And again, what was the point of it? This is an ad-free, non-for-profit community that only want to bring more eyes to small Pokemon fan projects, and they just took it down. And even though it's still fairly easy to find the more popular ones, a lot of smaller fan projects will get a lot less recognition now that Relic Castle is gone. This whole controversy relates to a whole other can of worms regarding Nintendo and their reluctance to let fans create games from things they love, which I won't really get into here due to how long this video already is, but what hurts the most is the fact that these fan games are made by a very small group of people who want to design their own Pokemon game that they always wanted to see. And so they pour years of their life into it, all for no money and just out of sheer passion they have for the series, and the Pokemon Company won't give them any favors and will actively try to diminish all their hard work. So it's up to other fans to seek them out so their hard work wouldn't go to waste, just for that to also be ridiculed by the same executives who tried to get rid of them in the first place. Which brings us all the way back to the original question I posed at the start of the video, where I asked how the Pokemon fans surpassed the creators. And after all this time and going on and on about why these fan creations take what Pokemon established and either changes it or improves upon it to the point where it won a goddamn award, I can wholeheartedly tell you without a shadow of a doubt that the answer is more complicated than I originally thought. Okay, if you want the short answer, then yes. Just fully admit that the official games lack creativity, which would motivate fans to create something more unique. And originally, this was a narrative I was going to end the video on, until I played the final game on my list, which I was going to dub the Ultimate Pokemon Fan Game. And that title was going to go to Palworld. Look, I know it's not technically a Pokemon fan game, but I felt the need to include it anyways because it's a lot like Pokemon, and I thought it'd be kind of cool. Whatever! For the longest time, I avoided Palworld because I was petty, and I didn't want to play something that people proclaim is Pokemon, but better. But the more I saw of it, and the more my friends told me about how good it is, I decided to bite the bullet and see if it lives up to the hype. And at first, it feels pretty familiar. You wash up onto an island and are greeted by Pokemon-like creatures, and you start your journey. Pretty similar to how Pokemon Legends Arceus starts up. But afterwards, the similarities immediately stop. There's no clear story to follow, just a lot of missions for you to complete. There's a crafting system, skill trees, upgrades, and a whole bunch for you to do that isn't really Pokemon related. I mean, you can capture pals into little balls, but you don't really fight with them. The game doesn't even have any turn-based combat, which is such a staple for Pokemon, and as a result, I felt pretty alienated. Not to mention, I felt like I sucked at the game. I could barely catch pals and my base was ass, so I didn't know how much longer I'd be playing Palworld. But then, I gave it more of my time. I sat down and really tried to learn it, and slowly, catching pals became easier, and crafting furniture became a lot more fun. You get lost in these huge areas for hours, and find new items and pals to catch, while you have pals at home who are taking care of the base. And yeah, I finally started to see what the appeal was to Palworld. But it's not because I think it's Pokemon but better. In fact, the game is far from that. You can see some similarities between this and like Legends Arceus, but it is way closer to something like Minecraft or Breath of the Wild. Hold on, sorry to bombard on you like this, but apparently, right before I finished making this video, Palworld actually got sued. Which is crazy because I was just talking about how Game Freak likes to sue everything, and now this got sued, which I found kind of funny. Okay, back to the rest of the video now. But it's at this point I realized that Palworld and every game I talked about previously may do a lot of stuff better than Pokemon, but that isn't something to knock the franchise for, since what it already established works so damn well. Because look, as much as these games can give us these mature stories or quality of life features, it's still just the same old Pokemon. You're still only allowed 6 Pokemon on your team. You can still only use 4 moves. Your Pokemon still have a staring contest. And even though there are games I mentioned that break that stereotype, people keep coming back to that traditional formula because that is Pokemon's nature. It has an easy gameplay style and is family friendly. And for a lot of people, that's how they like it. But as people grow up, they can either keep liking that style or start wanting something a little bit deeper. And sadly, I don't think the Pokemon Company can provide that. But other fans can, and I find that pretty reassuring. That if you really don't like what Game Freak is doing with the series, there are alternatives, even for people like me who can still find enjoyment out of the recent releases. We can appreciate both. And no matter how obscure or weird some of these can turn out to be, it'll eventually reach someone who will come to appreciate it. Xenoverse offers up a completely new Pokemon experience. Radical Red for people who want to replay the classics, but in a way that doesn't feel outdated. Reloaded for those who always want to play Pokemon as a real-time battle simulator. And even something like Pokemon Oof, a ROM hack so painfully hard to get through, probably has a fan out there somewhere that enjoys it. Even the video you're watching right now. See, I fucking told you that I'd somehow make Pokemon Oof relevant to this video. Let's go. The mod is still pretty bad though, but please don't play it. Even the video you're watching right now can be considered as a Pokemon fan creation of some sort, and there are tons of videos like this out there for you to find. Because if you're upset I didn't get the chance to talk about a certain hack or fan game you liked, then someone else definitely has, with these kind of videos popping up every week. And as time goes on, we'll get more games that try to reinvent Pokemon for the better. I mean, we've gone from whatever Pokemon Trep was to Palworld in 20 years, so who knows what kind of projects we'll see within the next 5. So where does this leave Game Freak? Well, they're still in a great position, all things considered. Their recent releases have been selling better than ever, but you are starting to see a big shift of the general opinions online. Their reputation has almost completely been tarnished with the initial release of Scarlet and Violet, and it's come to the point where it feels like we've reached a breaking point. And if they keep releasing games in that kind of state, then we would finally start to see a decline in their sales, with fans slowly migrating to fan-created Pokemon games. I mean, we've already kind of been seeing this with how popular Infinite Fusion was last year, and the rise of Palworld and Pokérogue this year. So who knows, come 2025 or 2026, what other Pokemon or Pokemon-like games would come out and maybe overshadow them entirely. And if this were to happen, then they would only have themselves to blame, since they keep deciding to rush out half-baked games. But in a weird way, I almost feel a little bad for the position they're currently in. Now, I'm not saying you should feel bad for a multi-billionaire company. No one should ever feel pity for the amount of money they have. But I do feel a little bit bad for the developers for having to rush these games out, and also for how fickle Pokemon fans can be. With how big the Pokemon community is, it's no surprise that can be very toxic, with people arguing every day on which games suck and who's the hottest 10-year-old in the series. And with such a big fandom, you're gonna have have a good chunk of people that will hate anything they come out with no matter what. And these people will gloss over all the improvements Game Freak has made with the series. Like, despite all the glaring flaws of Scarlet and Violet, it had some really good concepts, and Legends Arceus made some amazing strides for the series. And even though some recent reports look sort of optimistic, this won't be enough for some people and they'd rather stop supporting Pokemon forever. But at least now, they have alternatives. There are so many games and different ways to play Pokemon that they don't need the official games anymore, but can still find ways to enjoy the series they once loved as a kid. And as for me, even though I still had fun with the recent titles, maybe that won't continue, and eventually I might also choose to stop playing the official games. And before, the idea of leaving Pokemon kinda scared me. It was in my life for so long, and moving away from it feels like I'm losing a part of myself in the process. But now, I'm not so scared of that reality, because now I have so many other Pokemon ROMs or Pokemon related games to experience that would help fill that desire to play Pokemon. Earlier on, I mentioned it was Pokemon's lack of creativity that drove fans to create something unique. But perhaps it's actually Pokemon's sheer simplicity and approachability that lends itself for fans to create such interesting ideas. So even though in a lot of ways the fans have surpassed the creators, without those creators, we would have never had this many creative fans. But then again, I look at something like Moemon and think, yeah, maybe Pokemon should have never been made in the first place. I am so sorry that this video took this long to get out. I swear I wanted to get it done a lot earlier, but I just kept getting sidetracked by a lot of things, so here we are now. A huge thank you to all these developers who made these games in the first place. I tried my best to credit them the best I could in the video, but if I missed a developer here or there, just let me know in the comments below. And finally, if you made it this far, consider subscribing. These videos, while hard, are a lot of fun. I appreciate all the support I can get. And I promise that the next video will not take as long to get out. Probably.